Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, and today, Julia and I are excited to guide you through another educational episode where we help you understand real global issues in clear and simple English. And before we begin, we want to remind you that this podcast is designed to support your learning journey by bringing you stories that connect language with the world around you in a meaningful and understandable way.
We are very happy that you are joining us today, because in this episode we will explore a topic that is shaping international business and global manufacturing, as we discuss why more and more global companies are moving or shifting production from China to Vietnam, a change that has become extremely important for understanding how modern supply chains, trade relationships, and economic strategies work across different regions.
When we say shift production, we mean companies are moving their factories, equipment, workers, and entire manufacturing processes from one country to another. And this move usually happens when businesses look for better conditions, lower costs, more stable rules, or new opportunities, which means that studying this trend helps English learners understand major news stories and economic changes happening around the world.
This topic is important because when a large group of companies moves production from a powerful manufacturing country like China to a rising industrial center like Vietnam, it affects many things such as global trade, job markets, the price of goods, shipping speed, and investment decisions. And these changes influence not only governments and companies, but also ordinary people who buy products every day.
For English learners, understanding this global shift introduces valuable vocabulary like manufacturing, supply chain, investment, labor costs, production strategy, tariffs, and economic competitiveness. And these words appear in news reports, documentaries, international business discussions, and academic studies. So learning them now will make it easier for you to follow world events and improve your overall English fluency.
Before we continue, dear listeners, we kindly ask you to like this video because your support helps our educational content reach more learners. And please subscribe to the English Globe so you never miss our future lessons. And finally, we would love to know where you are listening from, so write your country or city in the comments and share your opinions about today's topic because your voices help us build a connected global learning community.
Now that we have welcomed everyone and introduced the importance of today's topic, we are ready to take you deeper into the reasons why companies choose to move their production from one country to another. And by the end of this episode, we hope you will not only understand the economic and political factors behind this shift, but also feel more confident reading and listening to international news in English.
When we look back at the last 40 years, it becomes clear that China's rise as the factory of the world did not happen by accident, because it started with a series of major economic reforms in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when the country opened its doors to foreign investors, invited international companies to build factories, and created special economic zones along the coast that encouraged manufacturing, exporting, and large-scale production. These reforms changed the entire direction of China's economy and made the country extremely attractive to companies that wanted to produce goods quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. Over time, China developed a massive workforce, low production costs, and strong government support for industrial growth, which gave companies confidence that China could provide stability and steady growth for many years.
To help our listeners understand this history in simple steps, it is useful to think of China's manufacturing growth like a ladder that companies climbed year after year. The first step was low labor costs, because China had millions of young workers ready to join factories, and this allowed companies to produce goods at much lower prices compared to many other countries. The second step was strong infrastructure, as China quickly built ports, highways, railways, airports, and industrial zones that made it easier and faster to move products from factories to ships and then out to global markets. The third step was government support, with policies that encouraged foreign companies to invest, offered tax advantages, provided land for factories, and promised long-term industrial development. All these steps worked together to turn China into a manufacturing superpower.
One of the reasons China was able to grow so quickly is that it focused on building complete supply chain systems, meaning that every part of the production process, raw materials, small parts, assembling machines, final packaging, and transportation, could be done in the same region or even in the same city. This made production extremely efficient because companies did not have to wait for parts from other countries, and they could respond quickly when demand changed. For example, in the electronics industry, a smartphone factory in China could easily get screens, batteries, chips, and packaging from nearby suppliers, which reduced costs and saved time. This type of system became a key strength of China's economy and helped companies operate at huge scale.
If we look at products made in China during the early years of its manufacturing boom, we find simple items like toys, clothing, shoes, and small household goods. But as China gained more experience, improved its technology, and trained more workers, companies began producing more complex products like laptops, televisions, cameras, refrigerators, power tools, and thousands of different electronic devices. The shift from simple goods to advanced technology shows how quickly China grew and how effectively it built its industrial capacity. By the early 2000s, it had become almost impossible to walk into a shop anywhere in the world without finding "Made in China" printed on nearly every product.
Another important part of China's story is the role of global companies that moved their factories to China in the 1990s and early 2000s. These companies included large clothing brands, electronics giants, furniture manufacturers, and even automobile companies, all searching for reliable and affordable production. Many of them found that China had everything they needed: low costs, skilled labor, fast building schedules, and supportive local governments. These companies brought money, technology, and new ideas, while China provided the environment needed to run massive operations. Together, this created a powerful partnership that reshaped global trade and made China central to the world's manufacturing system.
To help English learners understand this system, imagine a huge network of factories stretching across many provinces, each factory doing a different part of the job. One factory might produce plastic casings, another might build electronic parts, another might assemble the final product, and another might handle packaging and logistics. All these factories become part of a supply chain, a system that moves materials from start to finish. China's ability to organize such enormous supply chains is one of the reasons why companies stayed there for so many years and why the country became known as the world's manufacturing center.
Over the last 30 years, as China's manufacturing power grew stronger, global trade expanded along with it. Countries around the world began importing large amounts of Chinese-made products, and international shipping lanes became busy with containers filled with goods headed to Europe, the United States, the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. China also joined major trade organizations and developed trade agreements that made exporting even easier. As a result, China became deeply connected to the global economy, and millions of jobs around the world became linked to Chinese manufacturing, whether in transportation, retail, construction, or supply chain management.
But this massive success also brought challenges, because as China became richer, labor costs slowly increased, factory workers demanded higher wages, and companies started noticing that producing goods was no longer as cheap as it once was. At the same time, other countries in Asia were developing their own manufacturing abilities and offering lower costs or new advantages. But even with these challenges, China's early history as the factory of the world remains one of the most significant economic transformations in modern history, and understanding this background helps learners make sense of why companies are now considering new locations like Vietnam.
So when we talk about global companies beginning to move some of their factories out of China, We must understand that this shift is happening only after China dominated global manufacturing for decades. It built the world's strongest supply chains, created millions of jobs, supported foreign investors, and established powerful export industries. Even if some companies choose to diversify, China will continue to be an important part of global production. But now other countries, especially Vietnam, are becoming attractive alternatives for specific industries such as clothing, electronics, and footwear.
By breaking this history into simple steps, economic reforms, low labor costs, strong infrastructure, complete supply chains, and global demand, we can clearly see how China became the center of world manufacturing. This simple understanding helps English learners follow news about production shifts, trade tensions, and economic competition. With this background, listeners can now understand the next section, where we explain why costs in China are rising and why some companies are exploring new manufacturing locations. When we talk about why companies are rethinking their manufacturing plans, one of the biggest reasons is that costs in China have been rising for many years. In the early 2000s, China was one of the cheapest places in the world to build products, but today, things are very different. Wages have increased, factory operations cost more, and new production rules have made it more expensive to run large facilities. These changes do not mean China is becoming weak. They simply show that the country is growing, developing, and becoming a higher-income economy, which naturally raises the cost of doing business.
To make this easier for English learners, let's start with wages. In the past, factory workers in China were paid very low salaries, which allowed companies to produce goods cheaply. But as the economy grew, millions of workers gained more skills and demanded better pay. And the government also introduced protections to support workers. Today, factories must offer higher monthly wages, overtime pay, safer conditions, and better benefits. For example, a smartphone factory that once paid very basic salaries must now offer competitive wages to keep trained workers. This is good for workers, but it raises production costs for companies.
The second major factor is operating costs. Running a factory is not only about paying workers, it also includes electricity, water, land prices, transportation, and raw materials. As China's cities grew and became more modern, these costs also increased. Land in industrial areas became more expensive, and renting a large factory space now requires a much bigger budget compared to 20 years ago. Even the cost of shipping goods from Chinese ports has risen in some regions. When a company adds all these expenses together, the total cost of making one product becomes higher than before.
A good example is clothing manufacturers. Many clothing brands began producing shirts, jeans, jackets, and sportswear in China in the 1990s because the cost was extremely low. But today, the cost of labor and materials for clothing companies is much higher. As a result, some companies have started looking at countries like Vietnam, where wages and operating costs are still lower. This does not mean China no longer makes clothes, it still makes a huge amount. But the price difference is encouraging some companies to move part of their production elsewhere.
The third factor is stricter production rules. China has introduced new regulations to improve worker safety, protect the environment, and control pollution. These rules require companies to invest in cleaner machines, safer chemicals, better waste management, and updated equipment. For example, an electronics factory that builds computer parts must use improved ventilation systems, stricter recycling methods, and safer materials. These changes help protect people and the environment, but they also make production more expensive.
Electronics companies especially feel this change. Building smartphones, tablets, and small devices requires many chemicals, metals, and delicate parts. When environmental rules become stricter, companies need to upgrade their systems to meet new standards. This is great for health and safety, but it adds extra costs. A company that once used simple processes may now need to invest in modern equipment, better training, and improved waste treatment systems, all of which make the final cost of each device higher.
Another important point is competition. As China's economy grew, more companies arrived, and the industrial areas became crowded. When many companies compete for the same skilled workers, wages naturally rise. When many companies need the same materials, prices increase. This competition creates a strong manufacturing environment, but also pushes up costs. For global companies that produce millions of items every year, even a small increase in cost can make a huge difference in their budget.
So when companies look at China today, they see a place with great infrastructure, strong skills, and advanced factories. But they also see higher costs than before. This makes some companies consider moving part of their production to countries where labor and operating expenses are still lower. This does not mean they leave China completely. Many companies keep advanced production in China, but move simpler products to places like Vietnam, India, or Indonesia.
In the end, cost is one of the most important factors in company decision-making. If producing a smartphone in China becomes too expensive, a company may split its production, doing high-tech parts in China and basic assembly in Vietnam. If clothing becomes too costly to sew in Chinese factories, the company may shift those tasks to nations with lower labor expenses. For global businesses, every dollar matters because it affects the price customers pay, the profit the company earns, and the competitiveness of the product in the market.
This is why understanding rising costs in China helps English learners follow world news. When you hear a report about factories moving, you now know it is connected to wages, operating costs, new rules, and competition. These changes shape the entire global economy, and they help explain why Vietnam is becoming a new center for manufacturing. In the next section, we will explore why Vietnam has become such an attractive option for international companies looking to balance cost, quality, and stability. When we talk about why companies think carefully before expanding or staying in China, one of the strongest influences comes from global politics, because political disagreements between major countries can create challenges for businesses that depend on stability, long-term planning, and predictable rules. Over the last several years, various trade conflicts and diplomatic tensions have increased uncertainty for many companies working inside China, making some of them think about whether they should move part of their production to another country. For English learners, understanding these political factors is important because many news stories today are connected to trade, regulations, and international relations.
To help learners follow this discussion, it is useful to explain a few key vocabulary words. The first word is tariff, which means a tax placed on goods that are imported from another country. When a tariff is added, the cost of bringing that product into a country becomes higher, and this can affect prices for companies and for consumers. Another important term is supply chain risks, which refers to any problem that can disrupt the process of making products and delivering them to customers. Political disputes, border rules, or restrictions on technology can all increase these risks. The third term is regulatory pressure, which is when governments introduce new rules or policies that companies must follow, often making business more complicated or more expensive.
Trade tensions between large economies, such as the United States and China, have had a major effect on global businesses. When countries place tariffs on each other's products, companies that rely on importing or exporting goods feel the pressure immediately. For example, if a US company produces electronic parts in China and then imports them back to the United States, a new tariff means the company must pay extra money every time it brings those parts into the country. This extra cost can reduce profits, increase the price of the final product, or force the company to change its production strategy. Many electronics companies were affected by these policies, especially those making smartphones, computer parts, and communication devices.
Another example of how politics influences business decisions is the introduction of new technology-related rules. In recent years, some governments have created restrictions on certain types of equipment, software, or electronic components, especially those linked to national security concerns. When a company depends on advanced chips, high-tech machinery, or specialized tools that are suddenly restricted or heavily monitored, it becomes difficult to keep production stable. These restrictions do not mean that factories stop working, but they add uncertainty, and uncertainty makes businesses nervous. Companies prefer environments where rules are clear, stable, and predictable.
This political pressure can also affect supply chains in unexpected ways. When two countries have a disagreement, new inspections, new paperwork, and new customs rules may appear. This slows down the movement of goods and increases the risk of delays. A clothing company that brings fabric from one country to China and then exports finished shirts to another country may suddenly find the process slower or more expensive. A smartphone company that depends on a mix of Chinese and foreign parts may face challenges if political tensions affect trade routes or export controls. These supply chain disruptions force companies to think about diversifying their production so they are not too dependent on one country.
For English learners, it is helpful to think of supply chains as long lines connecting many different factories and countries. If one part of that line becomes weak because of political tensions, the entire chain becomes less reliable. This is why many global companies are now looking for production environments with fewer political risks. They want places where they can plan for 5 or 10 years without worrying that a sudden political argument will cause new tariffs, new rules, or new restrictions that make business more difficult.
Vietnam has become attractive partly because of this. Compared to some other countries, Vietnam offers a more neutral political position, steady trade relationships, and fewer major conflicts with large economies. It has signed several international trade agreements, which makes exporting goods easier and cheaper. When a company moves some of its production from China to Vietnam, it is not only thinking about cost, it is also thinking about stability and predictability. A stable environment allows companies to make long-term decisions with more confidence.
Another important vocabulary word is geopolitics, which means how countries interact with one another and how those interactions influence trade, security, and economic decisions. When geopolitics becomes tense, companies start to worry about whether their factories, supply chains, or shipping routes might be affected. Even if there is no direct conflict, the fear of sudden changes can shape business strategies. For example, a company may choose to build 2 factories in 2 different countries, so that if one location faces political pressure, the other location can continue working.
All these issues show how deeply politics and business are connected. When countries introduce tariffs, restrictions, or new rules, companies must protect themselves by reducing risk. This is why global businesses do not simply look at wages and operating costs. They also look at political stability, diplomatic relationships, and the long-term direction of global trade. Even small political disagreements can create large waves that move through the entire supply chain.
In summary, trade tensions, tariffs, and political pressure create uncertainty for companies that depend on smooth global operations. When factories in China face new costs, new rules, or new geopolitical risks, some companies decide to shift part of their production to places where they feel more secure. This does not mean they abandon China completely. It simply means they try to spread their production across multiple countries to reduce risk. Understanding these political and economic pressures helps English learners make sense of today's global manufacturing trends and why Vietnam is becoming a major destination for new investment.
As we move into the next section, we will examine the reasons why Vietnam has become one of the top choices for companies searching for stability, lower costs, and strong trade relationships. By understanding both the political challenges in China and the advantages in Vietnam, learners can gain a full picture of how global manufacturing is changing today.
Let's start with a simple idea. Many companies are looking for places where they can make products at good quality and lower cost, and Vietnam checks many of those boxes, because its average wages for factory work have been noticeably lower than in China for several years. which makes labor-intensive production like clothing, footwear, and electronics assembly more affordable for global brands.
Yes, and it's not only lower wages. Vietnam's government has worked to attract foreign companies with clear policies, investment incentives, and industrial zones where infrastructure is planned for factories, roads, ports, and utilities. So companies find it easier to build and run plants there. This combination of public support and private investment has helped FDI flow into manufacturing projects across the country.
Another strong point is Vietnam's young and growing workforce. The country has a large pool of working-age people who are often available for factory jobs and training, and the labor force is getting more skilled over time as vocational training and education expand, which helps companies move from very simple production tasks toward more advanced assembly work and higher-value products.
Infrastructure has improved too. Ports, roads, and industrial parks are being developed to handle large factories and export volumes, and logistics networks have become faster and more reliable. This matters a lot because companies that export goods need smooth transport to ship parts in and finished products out. Good infrastructure shortens delivery times and lowers the chance of delays that can add cost.
We should also mention trade agreements and market access. Vietnam has been active in trade deals and regional partnerships, which can reduce tariffs for exported goods and make it easier for factories in Vietnam to sell into key markets. For many companies, these agreements improve the business case for shifting some production to Vietnam because lower trade costs help protect profit margins and competitiveness in international markets.
A practical effect of these advantages is that some multinational companies are moving parts of their production out of China. Not always everything, but important product lines or assembly steps, to diversify risk and take advantage of cost savings, for example in electronics assembly, garments, and footwear. Big tech companies have been reported to shift selected product lines as part of broader supply chain strategies.
Let's break that down step by step so learners can follow. Step 1. Lower labor costs, reduce the per-unit cost of simple, repetitive tasks. Step 2. Government incentives and industrial parks, reduce startup time and bureaucratic friction. Step 3. Improving infrastructure and logistics, make exporting viable. And Step 4. Trade agreements and regional positioning, give Vietnamese factories good access to global markets. When these steps combine, the total cost and risk picture becomes very attractive for many firms.
It is also important to understand how companies use a diversification approach. Rather than moving all production at once, many firms adopt a China Plus One strategy. They keep higher value and complex production in China, where suppliers and skilled ecosystems are still strong, while moving labor-intensive assembly or particular product lines to Vietnam to cut costs and reduce geopolitical risk. This model allows companies to balance quality, speed, and cost.
From a learner's point of view, notice the new words we used: incentives, financial or policy reasons to invest; industrial park, a zone planned for factories; logistics, moving goods; diversification, spreading production across countries; and China Plus One, a strategy to avoid dependence on a single country. These terms appear a lot in business news, so learning them now will help you read and listen with more confidence.
We should not ignore the challenges Vietnam faces. As investment grows, wages and costs can slowly rise there too, and the country must keep improving training, energy supply, and regulatory frameworks. Still, for many companies today, Vietnam offers an attractive mix of cost, access, and political stability that complements, but does not entirely replace, China's industrial strengths.
Finally, it's useful to remember that these decisions are strategic and gradual. Companies evaluate total costs, wages, land, energy, logistics, risks, political, trade, supply disruptions, and long-term market access. Many are choosing Vietnam because, right now, it improves that overall balance: lower unit costs, growing workforce skills, supportive policies, and improving infrastructure, So Vietnam is becoming an important new hub in regional and global manufacturing networks.
Now, dear listeners, let's go deeper by looking at real examples of companies that have moved part of their production from China to Vietnam. These examples will help you clearly understand how this big shift works in real life. We will talk about electronics, shoes, clothing, and even furniture. And as we go through each example, try to notice the reason behind the move. Usually it is a mix of cost, risk, and long-term planning.
That's right, Julia. And listeners, remember, when we say moving production, we do not mean that companies take everything out of China. Instead, they diversify. That means they spread their production across more than one country. This helps reduce risk. If one country faces a problem, like higher costs, political tensions, or a big lockdown, the company can still continue working smoothly. In another place, Vietnam has become one of the most popular choices for this strategy.
Let's begin with electronics, because this is one of the biggest and fastest growing sectors in Vietnam. Many tech companies who used to depend heavily on China are now building new factories in Vietnam, for example. Several global smartphone companies have shifted a large part of their assembly lines to Vietnamese cities like Bac Ninh and Thai Nguyen. These cities have become major electronics hubs.
To make this clear for English learners, think of what happens when you buy a smartphone. Inside that phone, there are many small parts: the screen, the camera, the battery, the chips, the sensors. Many of these parts are still made in China, but the final assembly, the part where workers put everything together, is now often done in Vietnam. This makes production cheaper and lowers the company's risk. And because Vietnam has a young workforce, companies can train new workers quickly.
Another big sector moving to Vietnam is footwear. Many famous sports shoe brands, the kind you see in malls, sports stores, and online shops, are now made partly or fully in Vietnam. In fact, Vietnam has become one of the world's largest exporters of shoes.
Exactly. And the process is very simple to understand. Shoe production needs a lot of labor. When wages in China increased, many companies looked for countries with lower costs. Vietnam offered lower wages, thousands of skilled workers, and a manufacturing system that could grow fast. So companies opened large shoe factories there, producing millions of pairs every year.
Now let's talk about clothing. Over the past 10 years, Vietnam has become a major hub for making shirts, jackets, pants, and many other garments for big international brands. Clothing production requires careful stitching, attention to detail, and many workers. Vietnam has become very strong in this area.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that many clothing brands don't move everything at once. They might move only certain product lines. For example, they might shift the production of simple t-shirts or basic jeans to Vietnam. Meanwhile, more complex clothing, like luxury jackets or special designs, may still be produced in China because China has more advanced machinery for some fabrics. So again, diversification is the key idea.
Furniture production is another area where Vietnam has grown quickly. Wooden furniture, office chairs, tables, beds, all of these items have started to come from Vietnamese factories, not only Chinese ones.
This shift happened for a few reasons. First, importing wood is easier in Vietnam because of the country's geographic location and its strong links with timber suppliers. Second, Vietnam offers lower operating costs for large factories that need a lot of space. Third, many Western companies like having multiple sourcing options, meaning they want to buy from more than one country, so they are not dependent on a single location.
So, listeners, these case studies show that the shift from China to Vietnam is not just an idea. It is happening right now. Across many industries, electronics are moving. Shoes are moving. Clothing is moving. Furniture is moving. And each sector has its own reasons, but the message is the same. Companies want lower risk, lower cost, and more stability.
And it's important to say this again for our English learners. Companies are not leaving China. China is still a huge manufacturing powerhouse, with advanced factories, strong infrastructure, and deep supply chain networks. But companies are now building a second home for production, and that home, more and more often, is Vietnam.
Let's summarize some useful vocabulary from this section. Diversify. To spread production across several countries. Assembly line. A process where workers and machines put parts together to make a final product supply chain. All the steps needed to make and deliver a product. Sourcing. Choosing where to get materials or products.
Great list, Julia. And dear listeners, keep these words in mind because they appear often in global business news. When you understand this vocabulary, you can follow world stories more easily and talk about global trends with confidence. Now, dear listeners, let's explore what all these production changes actually mean for China, for Vietnam, and for the whole global economy. Understanding these effects helps English learners see the big picture behind international business news. When companies move production, the change does not happen quietly. It creates new opportunities, new challenges, and new directions for countries and industries. Let me begin with China, because for many years China has been the center of global manufacturing. When companies move a part of their production away, it naturally has an impact. The first effect is a slowdown in some labor-heavy industries like clothing, shoes, and low-cost electronics. These industries used to depend on China's low wages, but now other countries can offer cheaper labor.
But China is not standing still. That is very important to understand. China is adapting by moving toward high-tech industries. This means instead of focusing on low-cost products, China is now investing more in advanced technology. Things like robotics, electric vehicles, computer chips, 5G equipment, renewable energy technology, and smart manufacturing. China is building a future where factories use more automation, more machines, and fewer low-skill workers.
Exactly. And listeners, this trend is very normal in economic development. When a country becomes richer, wages naturally rise. When wages rise, companies start focusing on industries that require more skills instead of basic labor. China is now doing this at a very large scale. So while some factories move to Vietnam, China is building new factories that produce higher value goods. That means the overall economy continues shifting, not shrinking.
Now let's look at Vietnam. For Vietnam, this shift brings many benefits. One of the biggest benefits is new jobs. When companies open new factories, they need workers, managers, engineers, cleaners, drivers, and security staff. This creates thousands of jobs for young people across the country.
Another benefit is foreign investment. Investment means money coming from outside the country, usually from global companies. When a large company builds a factory in Vietnam, it brings millions or even billions of dollars into the economy. This money helps build new roads, ports, warehouses, and supply chain facilities. It also encourages local businesses to grow because they start working with these new factories.
Vietnam also becomes more connected to the global market. When many countries buy products made in Vietnam, it strengthens Vietnam's trade relationships. This means Vietnam gains more influence in regional business networks, and it becomes a more important partner for countries around the world. In other words, Vietnam moves from being a small player to a major production hub.
Now, let's talk about global consumers. That means people in every country who buy products like phones, clothes, shoes, furniture, and electronics. When companies shift production, consumers may see changes in prices. Sometimes products become slightly cheaper because manufacturing in Vietnam costs less, but sometimes prices stay the same because companies choose to invest the savings in better technology or stronger safety systems.
Another effect on consumers is availability. When production is diversified across many countries, there are fewer delays when problems happen. For example, if one country faces bad weather, shipping delays, or strict lockdowns, companies can still produce goods in another country. This helps shops keep products in stock and reduces the chances of shortages.
And diversification also means that global supply chains become more flexible. A supply chain is the whole journey a product takes, from a raw material to a factory to a warehouse to a store. When production is spread across multiple countries, the supply chain becomes stronger and more reliable. This is one reason why global companies now see Vietnam as a good partner. It helps reduce risks and keeps the world market stable.
So, listeners, when we look at China and Vietnam together, we see that this shift is not simple. China is moving upward toward advanced technology and high-value production. Vietnam is rising quickly as a manufacturing center for everyday goods. Both countries are growing, just in different directions.
And this shift also affects global politics, trade agreements, shipping routes, and business strategies. Many governments pay close attention to these changes because the movement of factories can influence jobs, imports, exports, and economic partnerships around the world.
For English learners, understanding this topic makes it easier to follow international news and economic stories. When you know what high-tech, automation, labor cost, or foreign investment truly mean, you can understand global changes more confidently and speak about them more clearly.
And that is one of the goals of the English Globe, helping you grow your English skills while learning about the world.
Dear listeners, now we are going to look at the future and what all these changes mean for international trade. This is very important because trade is the way countries buy and sell goods to each other. When companies move production from China to Vietnam or other countries, it changes how global trade works. It affects not only companies and countries, but also workers, governments, and consumers. Understanding this helps English learners follow global news more easily.
Yes, Julia. The first major point is that supply chains are becoming more diversified. For a long time, many companies relied heavily on China for manufacturing, but now they are spreading production across several countries. For example, a company might make electronics in China, assemble shoes in Vietnam, and produce textiles in Bangladesh. This strategy is called multi-country production or diversified supply chains. It reduces risk because if one country has problems, production can continue elsewhere.
Exactly, Adam. Diversified supply chains make international trade more resilient. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, some factories in one country had to close temporarily. Companies that depended on just one country experienced delays, shortages, and higher costs. But companies that had factories in multiple countries could keep their production running and deliver products on time. In the future, companies will continue to create these kinds of networks to reduce uncertainty and maintain smooth trade.
The second point is that Southeast Asian economies are becoming stronger. Countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia are gaining more foreign investment because companies want alternatives to China. As more factories open, these economies grow faster. This growth creates new jobs, new businesses, and stronger trade links with the rest of the world. Southeast Asia is becoming a major hub for international trade, not only for cheap labor, but also for skilled production in electronics, garments, and other industries.
And it is important to understand the effects on global consumers. When production spreads across multiple countries, trade becomes faster and more flexible. Shipping routes expand, ports in several countries become busier, and international logistics networks grow stronger. Consumers may enjoy more product choices, better availability, and sometimes lower prices because companies can make products in locations with lower costs.
Another important trend is that companies are learning to balance cost, risk, and quality. For example, they may continue to produce high-tech, advanced goods in China while making lower-cost or labor-intensive goods in Vietnam or other Southeast Asian countries. Some companies are even exploring new locations in Africa or South America for certain products. This approach reduces dependence on any single country, which is a smart strategy in today's unpredictable global market.
English learners, Notice some key vocabulary here. Diversified supply chains, production spread across several countries, resilient, able to withstand problems, foreign investment, money coming from outside a country, hub, a center of activity, and logistics, moving goods efficiently. These words are commonly used in business news and international trade discussions. Learning them will help you understand reports about global markets.
Looking into the future, we can predict that international trade will become more complex, but also more stable. Complexity comes from managing production in multiple countries, coordinating shipments, and following different regulations. Stability comes from the fact that companies are no longer dependent on a single location. If one country has political tension, natural disasters, or rising costs, other locations can compensate. This is good for the global economy and helps maintain the flow of goods to markets around the world.
Another future opportunity is that new industries and services may grow alongside manufacturing. For example, companies will need more logistics services, training programs for workers, and technology to manage production across countries. Governments may offer incentives to attract foreign companies, such as tax breaks or better infrastructure. As Southeast Asia grows as a production hub, there will be new opportunities for entrepreneurs, investors, and workers.
So, in summary, the shift from China to countries like Vietnam shows us that global trade is changing. It is moving toward multiple countries, more flexible production, and stronger networks. Companies are thinking strategically about cost, risk, and market access. Southeast Asia is rising in importance, and global consumers are indirectly benefiting from smoother trade. For English learners, understanding this helps you read, listen, and speak about world news with confidence.
And, dear listeners, the future of international trade is exciting because it opens new doors. Companies, workers, and governments must adapt. And learners like you can follow these trends while improving your English skills. This is exactly why we study topics like these, to combine learning English with understanding the global economy.
In the next section, we will discuss how students and professionals can use this knowledge to understand news, reports, and trends in international business, which is very helpful for your studies and your English learning journey. Dear listeners, in this section, we want to focus on vocabulary. We have used many important words in today's podcast, and it is very useful for English learners to understand them clearly. When you know these words, you can read international news, watch reports, and follow business discussions much more easily. Let's start with some key terms from today's topic. The first word is manufacturing. Manufacturing means making products in factories. For example, when a company makes shoes, electronics, or furniture, that is manufacturing. We talked a lot about manufacturing in China and Vietnam today.
Yes, Adam. For instance, if a factory in Vietnam makes smartphones, that factory is involved in manufacturing. Listeners, remember, manufacturing equals making products in large quantities.
Next is supply chain. This refers to all the steps a product goes through from raw materials to the final product that reaches the customer.
For example, to make a smartphone, the screen is made in one factory, the chips in another, and the final phone is assembled in another factory. All these steps together form a supply chain. Supply chain is very important because if one part is delayed, the whole process can slow down.
Another key word is tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that a government places on goods coming from another country.
Yes. For example, if a company imports shoes from China to the United States, the US government may charge extra money, which is a tariff. This makes the product more expensive for the company and the consumer.
The word investment is also important. Investment means putting money into a business, project, or country with the expectation of earning profit in the future.
For example, when a global company builds a new factory in Vietnam, that is an investment in Vietnam. The company spends money to create jobs, build buildings, and buy machines, hoping to make profits in the coming years.
Infrastructure refers to the basic systems a country has to support business and daily life, like roads, ports, electricity, and factories.
For example, good infrastructure helps factories move goods quickly. Vietnam has been improving its infrastructure, making it easier for companies to ship products to other countries.
The next term is labor costs. This means the money a company pays its workers to produce goods.
For example, in China, labor costs have risen over the years. In Vietnam, labor costs are lower, which is why some companies are moving part of their production there. Labor costs affect the total price of making a product.
Another important word is diversification. This means spreading production or investment across multiple locations to reduce risk.
For example, a company might produce some products in China, some in Vietnam, and some in India. This way, if one country has problems, the company can continue producing in other countries. Diversification equals reducing risk by spreading resources.
The word competitiveness is also very common in business discussions. Competitiveness means how strong a company or country is compared to others.
For example, Vietnam is becoming more competitive in manufacturing because of lower costs, young workers, and better trade agreements. A country or company that is competitive can attract more business and succeed in the global market. Other useful words we use today include automation, using machines to do work instead of humans; high-tech, advanced technology or products foreign investment, money coming from another country to support business; resilient, able to recover from problems quickly; geopolitics, how countries interact politically and economically. Yes, Adam. Listeners, try to make your own sentences using these words. For example, Vietnam attracts foreign investment because it has low labor costs and good infrastructure. Practicing this will help you remember the words and use them in conversations or writing.
To summarize, learning vocabulary from real-world topics like global trade, manufacturing, and supply chains is very useful. It helps you read news, understand podcasts, and speak about global issues confidently.
Exactly. Dear listeners, take notes, repeat the words, and try to explain them in your own language or in English. The more you practice, the easier it will become to understand complex topics like today's podcast.
And that wraps up our vocabulary breakdown for this episode. These words are the building blocks for understanding international business, global trade, and the changing manufacturing world. It also helps to practice reading simple English news sources. Many websites, YouTube channels, and podcasts explain international business news in beginner-friendly language. Look for content with short paragraphs, clear definitions, and visual explanations. Some news platforms even provide transcripts or subtitles, which you can read while listening. This dual approach, reading and listening, strengthens both your comprehension and pronunciation. For example, you can read an article about tariffs on Chinese goods, then listen to a podcast explaining the same topic in simple English.
Yes, Adam. In addition to reading, listening repeatedly is very powerful. English learners should not feel discouraged if they do not understand everything the first time. Listen to the same news story or podcast multiple times. Each time, focus on different things. The first time, try to understand the general idea. The second time, focus on vocabulary. The third time, notice details like numbers, dates, or country names. This repetition helps your brain process new words and concepts, and it also trains your listening skills for real-world English.
Another tip is to take notes while listening or reading. Write down key words, main points, and any questions that come to mind. For example, if you hear that a company is moving production to Vietnam because of rising labor costs in China, write down China, high labor costs, Vietnam, lower labor costs, investment, jobs. Later, you can review your notes and create short summaries in English. This practice improves memory, comprehension, and writing skills.
Discussing news with others or writing reflections is another excellent way to improve understanding. You can share your thoughts with a friend, family member, or online group. Even writing short sentences in English helps reinforce vocabulary and grammar. For instance, you could write, I learned that global companies move production to reduce costs and risks. Vietnam is becoming an important manufacturing hub. Reflecting in your own words is a very effective way to internalize both language and content.
Let's also talk about visual learning tools. Using maps, charts, diagrams, and infographics makes complex topics easier to understand. For example, a map showing China, Vietnam, and other countries helps you see production locations. A chart comparing labor costs in different countries clarifies why companies move factories. Many English learners benefit from visualizing trade routes, factories, and supply chains while reading or listening.
It is also helpful to follow one topic over time. For example, you might choose to focus on international trade for a few weeks. Each day, read one article, listen to one podcast, and write one short reflection. Over time, you will notice patterns, recurring vocabulary, and deeper understanding. This method is much more effective than trying to learn everything at once.
Another tip is to use online tools to check vocabulary. When you encounter new words like tariffs, automation, or resilient, you can check definitions in simple English dictionaries or listen to pronunciation guides. Then try to use the words in your own sentences. For example, diversification reduces risk in global business, or automation helps factories produce goods faster. Using new words actively helps retain them better than just reading or hearing them once.
Finally, remember that curiosity is key. Don't just memorize words or facts. Ask questions about why companies make decisions, how countries benefit, and how global trade affects consumers. Curiosity drives learning, both for English and for understanding the world. If you are curious about news stories, you will naturally remember vocabulary, understand concepts, and feel more confident using English.
To summarize this section, dear listeners, focus on vocabulary. Break down news into small parts. Connect news to real-life products. Read and listen repeatedly. Take notes. Discuss or write reflections. Use visual tools. Follow topics over time. Practice new words actively, and stay curious. These strategies will help you understand global business news while improving English skills.
Yes, Adam. By applying these tips consistently, you can follow complex topics like supply chains, tariffs, manufacturing shifts, and global economics with confidence. You will also strengthen your listening, reading, writing, and speaking skills. Learning English through real-world topics makes it more practical, engaging, and meaningful.
Remember, learning English and understanding global business go hand in hand. Each step you take in practicing, reflecting, and asking questions makes you a stronger learner and a more informed global citizen.
Keep practicing, stay consistent, and use the strategies we discussed. Over time, global business news will feel easier to understand, and your English will improve naturally. Learning English in context like this is powerful because it prepares you for real-life communication, reading international news, and engaging with the world.
That concludes this final section. Dear listeners, we hope these tips help you feel confident in understanding global business news, improving your English, and thinking critically about the world. Dear listeners, let's review the main ideas from today's podcast about why global companies are shifting production from China to Vietnam. First, we discussed how manufacturing works and what it means when companies move part of their production to another country. We explored the rising costs in China, including higher wages, stricter regulations, and increased operational expenses, which influence business decisions.
Then, we looked at trade tensions and global politics. We explained tariffs, supply chain risks, and regulatory pressures, showing how political uncertainty can encourage companies to find more stable locations for their factories. This helped learners understand why businesses carefully evaluate where to produce goods.
Next, we examined Vietnam's advantages as a new production hub. We explained how lower labor costs, young workers, improved infrastructure, government incentives, and strong trade agreements make Vietnam attractive for international companies. We also discussed the China Plus One strategy, where companies keep some production in China while expanding to other countries like Vietnam.
We also explored real-life case studies. Electronics, shoes, clothing, and furniture are among the industries shifting part of their production. Many global brands now operate large factories in Vietnam, illustrating how companies diversify to reduce risk, save costs, and maintain stable production.
Then we discussed the economic impacts on both countries and the global economy. China is adapting by focusing on high-tech industries, automation, and advanced manufacturing. Vietnam benefits from new jobs, foreign investment, and stronger trade relationships. Global consumers gain from more reliable supply chains, better availability of products, and sometimes lower costs.
We also looked at what this shift means for international trade in the future. Companies are diversifying supply chains, spreading production across multiple countries, and making trade networks more resilient. Southeast Asia is growing in importance, offering opportunities for investment, entrepreneurship, and new services alongside manufacturing.
Finally, we focused on vocabulary and language learning. Words like manufacturing, supply chain, tariffs, investment, infrastructure, labor costs, diversification, competitiveness, automation, and high-tech were explained with simple examples. This helps learners understand news about global business, economics, and international trade more clearly.
Now, dear learners, here is a short reflection task for you. Think about your own country and the products you buy every day, like clothes, electronics, or furniture. How are these products connected to global trade? Which countries produce them, and what factors might influence where they are made? Write a few sentences in English about your thoughts. This exercise will help you connect today's topic to your own experience while practicing English.
Remember, learning about the world while improving your English is a powerful combination. The more you read, listen, and reflect, the easier it becomes to understand complex topics like global trade and economics. Knowledge and language skills grow together.
Yes, Adam. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep practicing English every day. Observing global trends, understanding vocabulary, and reflecting on what you learn strengthens both your language and your awareness of the world.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us on this episode of the English Globe. We hope you found it informative and helpful for your English learning journey. Keep thinking, practicing, and expanding your knowledge of global trade and economics.
We look forward to sharing more educational topics with you in the future. Until then, continue learning, stay curious, and enjoy your journey with English and world knowledge.